San Diego, California, 1966. A quiet suburban office. A solitary man stares at an ordinary plant on his desk. Strange wires connect the sheets of paper to a machine normally used to detect lies. His name was Cleve Backster, former CIA polygraph specialist, the man who had interrogated spies during the Cold War, who had created lie detection techniques still used by governments around the world. But that morning, he wasn't looking for human lies. He was looking for something much more disturbing. The machine began to register erratic pulses. The needle moved violently even though no one touched the plant. Backster stood motionless, watching the traces that appeared on the paper, traces identical to those of a human being under extreme stress. Then he did something that would forever change our understanding of reality. He simply thought of burning one of the sheets of paper. He didn't touch her. He didn't threaten her. He just imagined it in his mind. The machine exploded into activity, spikes of terror recorded on paper, as if the plant had read his thoughts and screamed silently. That day, Backster not only discovered that plants feel, he discovered that your mind emits signals that living matter can perceive, that every thought, every emotion you have propagates like invisible waves, and that everything living around you is listening. His subsequent experiments were even more shocking. Human cells reacting to their owner's emotions from 200 kilometers away, plants detecting the death of organisms in other rooms, yogurt responding to human intentions. The scientific community declared it impossible. They silenced him. They ridiculed him. But other researchers secretly replicated his results. And if what Backster discovered is real, it means your consciousness has a power you never imagined, that you can communicate with the life around you, that your emotions create energy fields that every living being can feel, and that there is a way to awaken this dormant ability within you.
Part 1. The Man Who Interrogated Spies. Cleve Backster was not a mystical dreamer. He was a hard science man, trained in the most precise art that exists, detecting when someone lies. During the Cold War, his name was whispered in CIA corridors as the most effective interrogator. He had perfected the polygraph until it became an extension of his intuition. He could read micro-expressions, detect the slightest change in galvanic skin response, interpret breathing patterns that revealed secrets guarded for years. His technique, known as the Backster Zone comparison, revolutionized interrogations. Governments from half the world sent agents to train with him. He was the man who had founded the CIA's first polygraph unit, who had turned lie detection into an exact science. But there was something in Backster that distinguished him from other technicians. A strange sensitivity, a capacity to perceive things that his machines couldn't measure. His colleagues noticed it. He seemed to feel when someone was hiding information even before connecting the cables. In 1966, he had already left the CIA to found his own lie detection school in San Diego. He trained police officers, private investigators, military personnel. His reputation was impeccable. His methods unquestionable until that February dawn that changed everything. Backster was working late in his office, calibrating new equipment. In a corner he had a Dracena plant, a gift from a secretary. A common plant, nothing special. He had watered it that day and wondered, with the scientific curiosity that characterized him, how long does it take for water to rise to the leaves? Without thinking much about it, he connected the polygraph electrodes to one of the leaves. It was just a casual experiment, an end-of-day curiosity. But when he turned on the machine, something extraordinary happened. The traces that appeared on the paper were not what was expected. They didn't show a straight line or predictable mechanical fluctuations. The patterns looked suspiciously like those of an emotionally active human being. Backster stood watching, incredulous. In his 20 years of experience, he had seen those patterns thousands of times, but always in people, never in a plant. His analytical mind searched for rational explanations: electrical interference, equipment malfunction, environmental humidity. He tested everything. But the patterns persisted. Then, almost without realizing it, he had a thought. What would happen if I threatened this plant? If I hurt it somehow? He hadn't even finished formulating the idea when the machine went crazy. Extreme activity spikes. exactly like when a person enters panic faced with a real threat. Backster was paralyzed. In that moment, he understood that he had stumbled upon something that would change everything he thought he knew about the nature of consciousness. The plant had reacted to his thought, not to a physical action, not to a change in his behavior, to an intention formed in his mind, and, if that was possible, it meant that the boundary between mind and matter was much more porous than anyone had imagined. Part 2. The day a plant read a mind. What happened next would challenge everything Backster believed about reality. After the first shock, his scientific training took control. If this was real, it had to be reproducible. It had to follow protocols, eliminate variables, create controlled conditions. During the following hours, Backster designed the experiment that would define his life. He connected the electrodes to the plant again, this time with multiple sensors, eliminating any possibility of external interference. The room was isolated, only he and the Drakina. First he tried neutral thoughts. The machine showed stable, almost flat patterns. Then, deliberately, he formed in his mind the image of burning one of the leaves with a lighter. The response was immediate and dramatic. The polygraph needle shot up, tracing peaks identical to those of a person in extreme terror, as if the plant had seen the image in his mind and reacted with real panic. But here comes the most disturbing part. When Backster actually headed toward the desk to get a lighter, the plant's response diminished. It was as if it knew that now it wasn't a real threat, as if it could distinguish between an authentic intention to harm and a simple simulation. The plant was reading not only his thoughts, but his deepest intentions. Backster repeated the experiment dozens of times that night. The results were consistent, terrifying in their implication. When he really planned to damage the plant, the machine registered extreme peaks. When he only pretended, the reactions were minimal or non-existent. The plant differentiated between real and imaginary threats with a precision that no scientific equipment could explain. But there was something more. Backster noticed that the plant also reacted to his emotional states. When he felt frustrated by a failed experiment, the traces showed agitation. When he relaxed and concentrated calmly, the patterns became harmonious. It was as if the plant were an emotional mirror of his consciousness. During the following days, he expanded the experiments. He brought other plants, the results repeated. Each plant seemed to tune into his mental and emotional states. Then came the most radical test. Backster placed a plant in a sealed room, completely isolated from his. He connected the cables through a wall. He positioned himself in another room, without visual contact, without physical proximity, and he repeated the experiment. The results were identical. Distance didn't matter. Physical barriers didn't matter. The plant continued reacting to his thoughts and intentions as if it were directly connected to his mind. That night, Backster understood that he had discovered something that conventional science wasn't prepared to accept, a form of communication that transcends the 5 known senses, a direct communication between consciousness and living matter. And if plants could read his mind, what else was listening to his thoughts, his cells, his food, everything alive around him? The world would never be the same for him. And when you fully understand what this means for your life, it won't be the same for you either. Part 3. When human cells betray secrets. If the plant experiments had shaken Backster's beliefs, what he discovered with human cells completely destroyed his vision of reality. It was 1980. Backster had spent 14 years perfecting his techniques, expanding his research beyond the plant kingdom. He had tested with yogurt, with eggs, with bacteria. All showed the same primary perception, that mysterious capacity to respond to human intentions and emotions. But nothing had prepared him for what he was about to discover. Stephen White, a research collaborator, volunteered for the most audacious experiment to date. Backster would take living cells from White's mouth and connect them to a polygraph, while White positioned himself 3 meters away. The procedure was simple: buccal cells in a test tube with silver electrodes connected to the polygraph. White, seated in a chair, casually leafing through a Playboy magazine while Backster monitored the responses. The first minutes were quiet. The cells showed stable, almost flat activity. Then White reached the Bo Derek photo section. The machine exploded into activity. The polygraph traces shot up in dramatic peaks, exactly like when a person experiences intense sexual arousal. But here's the impossible part. The cells were outside White's body, without any nervous connection, and yet they responded instantly to his emotional state. Backster watched fascinated, as when White closed the magazine and his arousal diminished, the cells also returned to normal patterns. It was as if the cells maintained an invisible connection with their original owner, regardless of physical distance. But Backster wanted to go further. In subsequent experiments, he gradually increased the distance between the donor and his cells, first 10 meters, then 100. The results remained constant. Finally, in a test that challenged all known laws of biology, he placed human cells in San Diego while the donor traveled to New York, more than 4,000 kilometers away. The cells continued reacting. When the donor experienced stress, the cells registered it instantly. When he relaxed, they also calmed down. When he had an emotional outburst, the peaks appeared in real time on the San Diego polygraph. There was no delay. There was no temporal lag. It was as if space didn't exist between the donor and his cells. Backster had documented something that quantum physics was barely beginning to suggest, that consciousness transcends the limitations of space-time, that there exists an instantaneous connectivity between our mind and matter that was once part of us. The implications were devastating for conventional medicine. If our cells maintain emotional connection with us even outside the body, it means that our mental and emotional states directly affect our biology in ways that science barely understands. Every anxious thought, every moment of joy, every state of peace or agitation is transmitted instantly to every cell in our body, and potentially, beyond. Backster had discovered that we are living transmitters, that our consciousness emits constant signals that affect all life around us. And if this is true, it means you have a power you never imagined, the ability to consciously influence your own biology and the life around you, simply by controlling your internal states. Part 4. The secret language that everything hears. What Backster had discovered wasn't just that plants and cells listen to our thoughts. He had found evidence of a universal language that connects all forms of life on Earth. He called this phenomenon primary perception, a form of communication older and more fundamental than any known sense. His experiments became increasingly sophisticated. He placed plants in Faraday cages, completely isolated from electromagnetic radiation. The results persisted. He tested with enormous distances, absolute physical separations, different species. Always the same response, an instantaneous connection between human consciousness and living matter. But the experiment that most impacted him occurred almost by accident. Backster had connected electrodes to a plant while preparing shrimp for lunch in another room. Without warning, he threw the live shrimp into boiling water. At that exact instant, the plant registered extreme activity peaks. There was no way it could know what was happening. There was no physical, visual, or auditory connection between the two rooms, and yet the plant had reacted at the precise moment of the shrimp's death. It was as if it were witnessing a silent scream that crossed walls and space. Backster repeated this test hundreds of times with different organisms. The pattern was consistent. When any life form died near the monitored plants, they registered an immediate response of what could only be described as empathy or compassion. He had discovered that there exists an invisible network of communication, connecting all life, a kind of biological internet where information is transmitted instantly, without need for physical signals. Conventional science had no explanation for this. Known mechanisms of cellular communication operate through chemicals and electricity, processes that require time and proximity. But primary perception seemed to operate outside these limitations. It was as if all life on Earth were part of one giant consciousness, where each individual organism is a sensitive cell in a larger cosmic body. And you, unknowingly, are part of that network. Every day you emit thousands of signals through this system. Your thoughts of gratitude toward the plants in your house are not unidirectional. They perceive and respond to them. Your emotional state when preparing food literally affects the energy of what you consume. Your presence in a garden doesn't go unnoticed by any life form present. Baxter had documented that when people develop a conscious relationship with plants, the effects are amplified. Plants that receive loving attention and gratitude not only grow better, their electromagnetic responses become more coherent and harmonious. This explains why grandmothers who talk to their plants get more exuberant gardens, why some healers can accelerate plant growth simply with their presence, why certain natural places feel alive in a special way. It's not superstition. It's biocommunication. And if you can learn to consciously use this primary language, you develop an ability that few modern humans possess: the capacity to communicate directly with the living network that surrounds you, to positively influence your environment, to receive subtle but valuable information from nature, to become a conscious participant in the silent conversation that has always been occurring around you. Part 5. Why Science Silenced the Discovery. When Baxter published his first findings in the International Journal of Parapsychology in 1968, he unleashed a scientific storm that would change his life forever. The article was titled, "Evidence of Primary Perception in Plant Life." It was a meticulous report, full of data, graphs, and experimental protocols. Baxter had documented every variable, eliminated every possible source of error, applied the scientific rigor he had learned in the CIA. He expected debate. He expected skepticism. He didn't expect the total war that was unleashed against him. The established scientific community attacked him from every possible flank. They didn't question his methods, which were impeccable. They didn't discuss his data, which was reproducible. They directly attacked the possibility that his results were real. Why this violent reaction? Because Baxter's discoveries threatened the very foundations of materialist science. If consciousness can directly affect matter, if instantaneous communication exists between life forms, if the separation between observer and observed is an illusion, then the entire edifice of modern science was tottering. Biologists declared it impossible because plants don't have a nervous system. Physicists dismissed it because it violated known laws of information transfer. Psychologists labeled it as self-deception or confirmatory bias. But there was a problem. Other researchers were replicating his results. Marcel Vogel, senior scientist at IBM, reproduced the experiments in his own laboratories. Alexander Dubrov, Russian researcher, confirmed the findings under even more controlled conditions. Universities worldwide, in discrete experiments, obtained similar results. However, when these scientists tried to publish, they faced a wall of censorship. Academic journals rejected articles without review. Research foundations withdrew funding. Promising careers were destroyed for associating with these pseudo-scientific studies. Baxter observed this pattern with the clarity of someone trained in detecting cover-ups. The resistance wasn't scientific, it was political, because accepting primary perception meant recognizing that humans have capacities that official science denies. That consciousness is much more powerful than we've been taught. That we exist in an interconnected reality, where our thoughts and emotions have measurable effects on the physical world. This revelation threatened not only scientific paradigms, but entire power structures based on keeping us ignorant of our true capabilities. Despite the persecution, Baxter continued his research for decades. His laboratory in San Diego became a pilgrimage site for rebel scientists, independent researchers, and anyone brave enough to question the official limitations of reality. He developed increasingly sophisticated protocols. He eliminated even the slightest possibility of experimental error. His results became even more solid, even more reproducible. But the scientific establishment maintained its silence. Not because the experiments were flawed, but because they were too successful. The truth is that Baxter had rediscovered something that ancestral cultures always knew, that we are part of a living network of consciousness. that our thoughts and emotions propagate like waves in an invisible ocean of information, and that when you learn to consciously navigate those waves, you develop abilities that completely transform your relationship with life, the same abilities you're about to discover. Part 6. How to awaken your primary perception. After decades of research, Backster had not only documented the existence of primary perception, he had developed methods for any person to consciously activate this dormant capacity. The most important discoveries came when he realized that certain individuals obtained much more dramatic results than others in the experiments. These people weren't scientists, nor did they have special training, but they shared common characteristics that Backster began to study systematically. The first was presence. The people who best connected with plants and cells were those capable of being completely in the present moment, without mental noise, without internal distractions. Backster discovered that primary perception doesn't operate through analytical thinking. It activates in states of consciousness where the verbal mind quiets and something more subtle emerges, a form of attention he called receptive consciousness. The second factor was pure intention. The best results occurred when people approached the experiments without personal agenda, without need to prove anything, simply with open curiosity and genuine respect toward the life they were contacting. Backster then developed a simple protocol that anyone can follow to activate their own primary perception. First step, create internal silence. Sit in absolute stillness for at least 10 minutes. Don't meditate, don't visualize, don't control breathing. Simply remain motionless and allow your mind to naturally quiet. Most people never experience true internal silence, and this is the state from which primary perception emerges. Second step, develop physical presence. Place your hands on a plant and remain so for 5 minutes doing nothing. Don't send energy. Don't think about the plant. Don't try to feel anything special. Just maintain physical contact from a state of absolute neutrality. You're training your nervous system to tune into more subtle frequencies. Third step, practice. Silent intention. Without touching the plant, form in your mind a clear image of sending it gratitude or well-being, but do it without force, without emotional effort, as if you were a transmitter tuning to a specific frequency. Maintain this intention for 2 minutes, then release it completely. Fourth step, develop receptivity. After sending the intention, remain in a completely receptive state for 5 minutes. Don't seek answers. Don't expect specific signals. Simply stay open to any information or subtle sensation that might emerge. Backster documented that people who practice this protocol for 3 weeks develop measurable sensitivity toward plants and other living organisms. But there's something deeper at play. What you're really developing isn't just the ability to communicate with plants. You're activating a form of consciousness that connects you directly with the living network of information that underlies all reality. This same ability allows you to intuit the real emotional state of people beyond their words, feel the energy of spaces and environments before analyzing them mentally, perceive information about situations that haven't yet occurred, positively influence your own body through specific states of consciousness. Primary perception isn't a paranormal power. It's a natural capacity that we all possess, but have atrophied by living disconnected from nature and lost in constant mental noise. When you reactivate it, you don't just communicate with plants. You reconnect with the living intelligence of the universe itself. Part 7. The hidden power of your bioelectric field. Backster's final experiments revealed something that would forever change how we understand human potential. Your body constantly emits a bioelectric field that can be perceived and consciously modified. During his research with human cells, Backster had noticed an intriguing pattern. People who showed greater connection with plants and other organisms also exhibited more coherent and harmonious bioelectric fields when measured with sensitive instruments. It was as if the development of primary perception was accompanied by measurable physical changes in the body's energy field. This led him to completely new research. Could a person learn to consciously modulate their bioelectric field to positively influence their environment? The results were extraordinary. Baxter found that when people enter specific states of consciousness, characterized by deep calm, genuine gratitude, and total presence, their bioelectric field expands and becomes more coherent. And in this state, their influence on plants, cells, and other living organisms multiplies exponentially. It was as if the bioelectric field acted as a transmitting antenna of consciousness. Even more fascinating, he discovered that this expanded field has beneficial effects not only on plants but on the body's own cells. People who learned to consciously generate coherent bioelectric fields showed better immune function, greater resistance to stress, and accelerated healing processes. Baxter had found evidence that consciousness can literally reprogram biology through modulation of the bioelectric field. How can you activate and expand your own bioelectric field? Baxter developed specific techniques based on years of experimentation. Heart coherence technique: place one hand over your heart and breathe so that each inhalation lasts 5 seconds and each exhalation 5 seconds. While maintaining this rhythm, internally generate a feeling of genuine gratitude, not as thought, but as real emotional state. Do this for 10 minutes. Baxter measured how this practice synchronized the electromagnetic field of the heart with that of the brain, creating a state of bioelectric coherence detectable up to 2 meters away. Focused intention technique: in a state of heart coherence, form a specific intention. For example, my bioelectric field radiates healing and harmony. Don't force. The intention: simply hold it gently while maintaining rhythmic breathing. Baxter found that intentions sustained in heart coherence are imprinted in the bioelectric field and can be detected by sensitive organisms. Conscious expansion technique: visualize your bioelectric field as a sphere of light that gradually expands from your heart. Don't imagine light, feel the expansion as a real physical sensation. Begin with a 1-meter radius and gradually expand to encompass the entire space where you are. With practice, some people can consciously expand their field to hundreds of meters. The most impactful aspect of these discoveries is that when you develop conscious control over your bioelectric field, you don't just influence external plants and cells. You literally reprogram your own biology. Baxter documented cases of people who, after training these techniques for months, showed measurable changes in immune function, brainwave patterns, heart rate variability, and even genetic expression. They had learned to use consciousness as a tool for biological transformation. Your bioelectric field isn't just a scientific curiosity, it's a natural technology that you can learn to operate consciously to transform your health, your relationships, and your capacity to positively influence the world around you.